Hello and welcome back to the channel, everyone. He is back, and I'm very excited again to have a good discussion with him on all things happening in the geopolitical world through the eyes of the Catholic prophecies, the Marian apparitions, and who better to discuss it all with us than the best friend of the channel, my mon ami, Xavier Ayral. Great to have you back. How are you?
Oh, hello, laddie. Always happy to be back in Scotland. Always nice to be here. How are you, laddie?
Yeah, all the better for seeing you. We've got quite a good bit to discuss, and again, we have to stop ourselves so I can hit that record button. There's so many things happening, and yeah, as always, before I forget with my excitement, would you like to quickly say a little prayer for to be guided by the Lord and all that we say is for Him?
Oh, I think that would be a splendid idea. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. We invoke the most precious blood of our Lord Jesus Christ on this show, on Mark and his lovely family, and on the contents that will be discussed openly here. And we beg God to render Satan blind, deaf, mute, and completely impotent in distorting or damaging the content of this show and discussions which will take place here for the benefit of God's faithful. For this, with the bottom of our hearts, we pray in the name of the God the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen. Thanks, Xavier. So, there's a lot been happening. It's been a busy couple of weeks. And I've been saying for months that I'm anticipating, I can sense something's coming, even as early as autumn, winter this year. Not even from the prophetic side, but even from those warnings that have came from certain people, like Klaus Schwab a couple of years ago at the World Economic Forum, and others like him. They're anticipating a great cyber pandemic with a great attack over the infrastructure of the countries. And just this past couple of weeks, we're seeing massive cyber attacks on um, like supermarkets here, like M&S, the famous Jaguar Land Rover, which are costing them hundreds of millions per day, apparently. And then we're seeing it hitting the airports more intensely all over Europe, I believe. We've seen the grid going down months ago in Spain at a certain area. And more like that seems to be happening just now. And I'm just sensing there's something like that that's maybe going to coincide with something else. And it's not because I'm hoping or thinking or obsessing over predictions. But when you see that, then you see the historic state visit with Trump to the UK, and it's a big tech deal. And then a few days later, the UK Prime Minister is announcing digital IDs in the UK to tackle the migrant crisis. Otherwise, you're not able to work. And then there's more that we can get into with it. But when I see this stuff coming, I just see that it's getting a little more clearer in contrast to what we were expecting, what you and I have even discussed over a dozen times now the past couple of years, what you've written in your book and all the rest of it. I even had a couple of quotes coming up from Chat GBT that even Marie-Julie Geheny warned about the mark of the future or the persecution because of it. Can you take us through when you hear these things? And I can see she's over your right shoulder in that photograph there. How, how do you see these
Yes.
things rolling out more clearer as we're seeing it from the geopolitical side in the eyes of the prophet, the prophetic?
Well, yes. The situation is, you could see the least you could say is that it is dire. We are right now flirting, as you very well described it, with sheer disaster, are we not? The description of the events that are taking place, the way you described it, is extremely accurate. And Marie-Julie Jani indeed has announced all this. We had so many shows on your studio about the subject at hand. Marie-Julie Jahini did mention, as you pointed out, about the mark coming when, if indeed you will not be able to go to the market or live like a normal citizen unless you accept to submit to the authorities and have a foreign object implanted in your body in order to be able to be accepted and proven to be healthy. Now, this in itself is a complete violation of all human rights ever written since the creation of the European Union, or even since the even the human rights since the French Revolution, which were written shortly thereafter. But the fact of the matter being is these events, the gravity of which um, can be seen on a daily basis by just putting on the television, demonstrate clearly that yet again the prophecies which were given forth, not just by Marie-Julie Jarini alone, she's undoubtedly one of the principal visionaries in our times. There are others like Alois Illmeyer from Germany, and more contemporary ones like the ones of Garavandal and others. Our Lady of Sister Agnes Asagawa from Our Lady of Akita, the visionaries from Maria Speranza Bianchini from Betania, those of San Nicolas in Argentina, and others. It's alarming. What is most alarming, more than anything else, is the fact that, for instance, in the case of, as you mentioned, about Marie-Julie Shahini, uh, none of her prophecies were proven wrong. Everything she announced from the 1870s until 1941, when she passed away, everything she announced took place with the precision of a computer. It's extraordinary. She didn't make a mistake once. And that is alarming because one reaches the conclusion that if indeed 100% of the past prophecies, and when I'm referred to as past prophecies, is prophecies that were for times behind us, were proven to be authentic and to have come true, what does it leave us as far as a margin of error for our present and immediate future? I regret to say not much, does it?
Mm-hmm.
And indeed, the prophecy she gave us for our immediate future is bleak at the very least. And today, when you discuss the international geopolitical situation, you couldn't be more right. As you know, although I live on this side of the pond, I watch most of all, 90%, 85% of my time, French news, French TV. And yesterday again, on the French national TV, we had the ambassador of Russia in Paris give a live interview to one of our most famous journalists. And he was asked, Your Excellency, if indeed a Russian plane were to be shot down by NATO forces, what would be the immediate response of Russia? How would they interpret this action, even if it were above NATO's territorial airspace? The answer did not make itself wait for a second. He answered war. So we are at a point now where I think Putin does not play diplomat anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I, cou- I spoke this morning, as I mentioned to you behind the camera a few moments ago, with this friend of mine in Brussels, who clearly, it was very early in my morning, who clearly explained something which was shocking. He mentioned that NATO headquarters in Brussels discovered that, well, knew from day one that those two MiG-31s that supposedly, allegedly, at the beginning of this week, crossed the Estonia's territorial airspace, in fact, did not. Flew ever so close to the border by about 10 kilometers from Estonia's territorial airspace and returned safely home without any interference from either. I think there were two Italian Eurofighters that were launched to intercept them outside Estonian territorial airspace, but they arrived too late. They already returned into Belarusian or Russian territory by then. So the situation being is, according to him, to my friend in Brussels, all the NATO headquarters, the Americans, the English, the French, etc., are all in favor to try to appease the situation, to calm down, since particularly all the European intelligence shows that Ukraine is standing on its last leg. All the front on the eastern front against the Russians is collapsing miserably. And right now, the Ukrainians are putting all their reinforcement on Petrovsk, on the city of Petrovsk, which, tactically speaking, is a cornerstone for the defense on Donbass. Petrovsk is almost completely surrounded. It's surrounded, according to him, by about 83, 84% by the Russians. That's their usual tactic to take over big cities. They're surrounding and a siege process. Petrovsk is about to collapse. Once Petrovsk falls under Russian hands, all of Donbass will collapse as well. The Ukrainians will have no other recourse but to go behind the Dnieper River, because behind Petrovsk is all flatlands.
Mhm.
There is nothing to create a defensive line. He will have to be behind the Dnieper River. I recommend, and this was confirmed not just by my friend in Brussels, but uh, I recommend strongly a couple of American websites that are very good and that take their sources directly from the Pentagon and all CIA officers. The one which is hosted by the well renowned and celebrated Judge Anthony Napolitano from
Mm.
the American podcast channel called Judging Freedom. There he has guests of the caliber of Colonel O'Connor, uh,
The
who
McGregor.
was a hero. McGregor, I beg your pardon. Colonel McGregor, who, as we all know, is a celebrated hero of the Gulf War. No? Likewise, there is another one with, I forget their name, Duran, and another English fellow who is of Greek origin. I forget their name.
I
But
think
anyway, they're
what you're
brilliant.
talking about, yeah. Yeah, I'm aware of those ones. I don't watch them all the time, but I do see them popping up sometimes, and I've listened to some with Colonel McGregor. Yeah.
Yes. And his sources come directly from contacts he has in the Department of Defense in the United States, who served under him, and others from the Pentagon itself. And Judge Anthony Napolitano invites also officers that were used to work with the CIA and that are still maintain contact with them. That confirmed, to my great surprise, what my friend in Brussels told me. What's more, and I'll finish with that. But a couple of weeks ago, about 10 days ago, President Emmanuel Macron ordered the new chief of staff of the French armed forces, which who has replaced the older one, who was very much against the political decisions of the French Élysée to adopt such an aggressive stand against Russia. An order was given to him about 10 days, 14 days ago, to prepare an entire French division, Mouvement Rapide, to be moved and placed on alert in order to be possibly sent to Poland and from there possibly to defend Odessa in Ukraine. The General of Head Command in France responded that he refused to do so, that the French armed forces and nuclear arsenal has one particular and special mission, and that is to defend the integrity and the sovereignty of French national soil and not to act upon political capriciousness coming from the Elysee. This sort of insubordination has not been seen in France since the beginning of the Franco-Algerian War in 1952-1958.
Mhm.
So there is ebullition right now, a lot of tension in the French presidential palace about this event. And right now, very much like your Prime Minister Starmer, President Emmanuel Macron has the lowest national polls that any president in the history of France ever had before. It's a new record reached. So these are the latest news I've got.
But even with all that, why are these unpopular globalized commies, as I'm starting to call them all the more, how are they still holding on to jobs? Because before Keir Starmer and the Labour Party here in the UK, we had a conveyor belt of prime ministers, including the record breaking shortest one ever with Liz Truss, all in the Tory parties. But now when Keir Starmer comes in, he's the one that's like, I've sold my soul to get all this through. I'm doing it so quickly. I'm doing it without remorse or empathy. I've not even put it through Parliament about digital IDs. I'm just telling you it's coming. And then it's like, how do we get this? This guy seems to be stuck inside government. We can't get rid of him. But with all this stuff happening, Xavier, from the eyes of the prophecy side, and it's not just Marie-Julie Jehani, it's many others that have always warned Russia, Islam repeatedly, and the many other things that are coming. Of course, there's greater details within that when you start going deeper to what they've wrote, including obviously Marie-Julie Jehani. But could you see from memory, at least, of any exact quotes from her or others? You did mention, was it Alois? Um, was it?
Ilmeyer.
Yeah, people keep telling me to read into him. I'm aware of him, but I haven't got round to doing it. But have there got any specific prophecies that what we are seeing is exactly what they've been warning us about coming?
Yes, actually, after this show, remarkably enough, I'm doing a show in French about this same subject, Alois Illmeyer. And this was a German gentleman who was born at the end of the 19th century. He participated in World War One. He was sent into Russia, and during an explosion, which came close to finishing his days, he recovered with new gifts, or so it appears. No, he began truly um, to to start having visions of the future, and late 1930s. He was a sourcier in France. Somebody who finds sources of water to start building wells. I do not know the term in proper in the King's English, but in French, the name is sourcier. And he was able to find them. He was absolutely unbeatable. He made a profession out of it. But he was also able to see future events like if it were in a movie. And so much so that during the Second World War, when although he remained a civilian, a lot of parents who sent their son into the German Wehrmacht on the Russian front used to come to him to ask him the whereabouts of their son, and he was always right. He survived. He's close to Sebastopol, or this one died, I regret to say, and he explained the situation and the circumstances of his death and demise. No? But much more than that, after the war, he began to make prophecies of the future, including prophecies of changing society within the European Union, or continent, should I say. And at that time, he began to see that the levels of morality after liberation, after the end, or rather, after the ashes of World War II would have finally set on the European soil, a new society would spread, which would be a great deal more liberal, which would totally throw out of the window all codes of what we used to know as morality. Now, he explained that pornography would be able to be seen openly through channels and other means of telecommunications, that it would become somewhat normal, that the new republics and the new governments would tend to shift more towards the left, and that because of the fact that socio-communist parties would always throw as a threat or as an argument the fact that anything and everything that did not agree or match with their ideology would appear more and more like that of the neo-Nazi one, and everybody has, since we are all Europeans here, well, most of your viewers anyway, know of the fear of being called neo-Nazi. I mean, the print of the German occupation in France and the Nazi ideology, although due to the fact that it has taken place almost a century ago, has left a print towards generations which have never lived that time. And of course, to this day, the younger generation, the young politicians, and not so young, even the older ones, are always afraid to be branded fascist or neo-Nazi to that effect. In order to avoid that sort of thing, they go to the other extreme of the political spectrum. No, and so on one instance, Alois Illmeyer said, "When I was a child, I had the impression that water was." Bringing forth a storm of sorts. He declared that in 1949 that the time would come when indeed Europe would be completely overtaken by massive amount of foreigners. That Germany, since he was German, would see the arrival of millions of foreigners from Northern Africa and from the Middle East, which of course happened. And then he added, this would not simply happen to Germany, it would happen particularly in France and England and other nations as well, such as Spain and Italy. At the time when he said this was completely unrealistic. I mean, most nations that were members of the British Empire were still under the British Empire. The process of decolonization started right after World War II, beginning with India, and which included Pakistan. Pakistan separated from India years later. No, but indeed, when he mentioned all this, it still was unrealistic, very much like the prophecies of Marie-Julie Jahini, which began in 1870, when she mentioned the same thing would happen in Europe. It was a time when World War One did not even start yet, and Muslims in France were a curiosity more than anything else at all. No, same thing could be said for England, I suppose. But Illmeyer did explain that they would have a tremendous in Germany. They would have an overwhelming amount of particularly Turkish origin foreigners who would come over their country. He mentioned Pakistanis and Indians would principally come to the United Kingdom, although not limited to those. There would be also some Northern Africans coming over and sub-Saharan ones. In France, it would be all of Occidental Africa, all the old colonies, who would come over to mix the dust of their nations with French soil, in the own words of Marie-Julie Jahini. So all these prophecies, although at the time they were uttered, made no sense. Today, we are seeing them being a reality, a way of life now. And what we've seen in your country, in the Great Britain, in London, having managed to amass the volume of over 3 million English subjects calling for the rehabilitation of British sovereignty over their own nation, their own soil, that sends a clear message, not just to England, mind you, but throughout the entire European continent. There is a problem. Finally, no one can deny that any longer. No? So, regarding the war, Alois Illmeyer did mention this about England, but mentioned as well that the conflict would start at a time whenever everyone will utter the word peace, shalom, he said, and that the war would start originally from the Middle East, and after the assassination of three political parties trying to gather to set up a peace term treaty with Eastern Europe and Russia, in other words, Ukraine and Russia. And that one particular political high personality would be killed in the Czech Republic, and the other in Budapest, in Hungary. It would be when the third party, whom he said would be an American president, would be killed somewhere either in the Balkans or somewhere in the Eastern Europe, that finally the successor of this American president would declare officially open conflict with Russia as a result of this assassination. However, according to Alois Illmeyer, who did make a multitude of prophecies, all proven correct, during World War II, at a time when Germany was still at its peak in 1942, according to him, the Russians will surprise all of the West by starting a blitzkrieg of sort 3 days after the new American president's declaration of war, and would start an invasion over Hungary, Czech Republic, Poland, Germany, Denmark, and would reach the border side of the Rhine River. And the Danube would be completely occupied on both sides by the Russian army. And it would be surprising because the Americans, particularly the Americans, and NATO headquarters would never have suspected the Russians to be so quick to respond and so efficient in mobilizing such large volume of troops for such a quick blitzkrieg in Europe. Everyone will be taken by surprise.
Yeah.
While he described this, he announced that the Muslims as well will interact in the Middle East, will go over Israel and will beat the Israelis through a new alliance of Muslim consortium. No, but what is frightening, and that I've never seen or read on any other alleged apparition site is a prophecy he makes about the Pacific. He mentioned, and this is alarming as well, that in the Pacific, China and Russia and North Korea will make an alliance and will attack the United States with a surprise nuclear attacks on some of their major cities. And that elite troops from Kamchatka and Siberia will disembark in the Aleutian Islands and Alaska, soon to be joined by Chinese troops who will do away with the threat of Japan and South Korea. Taiwan will quickly be taken over. The islands in the Pacific will be under assault, and an invasion of sorts, however realistic or unrealistic your viewers might think it is, I'm just making an echo of these prophecies,
Mhm.
would see a Russo or Sino-Russian Northern Korea invasion of Alaska, part of Alberta, Washington State, Oregon, and California. They would stay there for a very short period of time as the Americans quickly, despite of their massive losses, they would lose millions of civilians in the attack of these American cities, would mobilize immediately, throw the Chinese, North Korean, and Russian out of the United States, out of Canada, out of Alaska, and would continue the war until the war would end. No? Um, I know it sounds unrealistic, and it's hard to believe, but at the same time, taking a step backwards, my friend Mark, I remember Father Michel talking in 2019 of a vision that God the Father allowed him to have, which was 13 trails coming over the United States, and that he saw 6 of them being pushed away, with the voice of God the Father telling him, because America prayers the Chaplet of Divine Mercy
Oh, yeah.
have not permitted all of these attacks to reach their targets. However, he saw 7 cities in the United States flash with a tremendous bolt of light. He didn't tell me what 7 cities, but that's what he saw.
Mhm.
And still, 7 major cities in the United States, we're talking of millions of casualties. So, and Marie-Julie Jany, again, all this is assumption on my part, but Marie-Julie Jany did state that when war will take place on the European continent, the European allies will not enjoy the support or the military assistance of the Americans. France will be left alone, and its allies, of course. And the Russians will finally, ultimately, cross the Rhine River, betting that the French will not use their nuclear arsenal to push them away, and they will be right. And they will attack France. They will not complete the invasion. They will be stopped on a line from Le Havre to Bordeaux, and everything east of that line would be conquered and under Russian and Muslim occupation. The Muslims will disembark supposedly on the French Riviera in southern Italy and on the Costa del Sol and Andalusia in Spain. Spain will also be taken by surprise. But Alois Ilmaiers did state that indeed the war will continue until finally the 3 days of darkness, which will be the final seal
Mhm.
of the chastisement, which will come after the great miracle, which is expected to take place in various true apparition sites around the world. One of which being Garabandal, from which I understand you came back not so long ago, and Medjugorje, and also Guadalupe in Mexico. So all these forces want to wonder, and I know that the counter part of the argument against these prophecies will be, oh yes, of course, but look at the Russians right now. They're pathetic. They're not even managing to conquer more than 20% of Ukraine's territory, and with all their armed forces and so on, they're not able to do anything else but scratch kilometers square of territory on a monthly basis. That's not what my friends in Brussels tell me. The reasons why they've done so, first of all, is twofold. First of all, because they try to maintain the casualty rate to a sheer minimum. Despite what we hear on English and French and German and Italian news media, according to intelligence of NATO, the Russians from 2022 till today have approximately lost about 135, 140,000 troops killed in actions, KIA. They have about the same amount in wounded, according to the same intelligence, and this has been confirmed in the show of Judge Napolitano with Colonel McGregor. The Russians might have suffered about the Ukrainians have lost over 1.8 million KIAs killed in action, and about 110, 100,000 missing in action. Those numbers are apocalyptic. And
Mhm.
according to my friends in Brussels, the eastern line of the Ukrainian defenses are one hair away from disintegrating. They are out of men, they are out of ammunition, they are out of armor. They certainly have no aerial defense you can speak of, and their defenses against Russian drones and missiles are practically up to zilch. None. Zero. Practically. The Europeans are doing what they can, but the French, the English, the Germans have practically emptied all their reserve arsenals and ammunitions and missiles and cannons in favor of Ukraine for the past almost 3 years. According to a French general who was interviewed on LCI, TF1, National French TV, if the Europeans were to fight today a conventional war of the kind that is taking place in Ukraine, according to General de Villiers, um, we would not last. We would not have enough ammunition for over 3 days. The same for England. The Germans would be less than two. They have no more reserves. So that is the latest news I can tell you. This is the intersection between the revelations given through Alois Illmeyer and Marie-Julie Jahini and Father Michel Rodrigue, and in retrospective what is truly going on in accord with what NATO intelligence is reporting and what we hear through other American sources like the ones I mentioned, Judge Napolitano,
Mhm.
Colonel McGregor, and this English channel, Anglo-Greek channel that appears ever so often on the internet.
Well, I'm just going to get some of this up here for us to see, because, like you say, let me just get back to live mode here. Get this up. There we go.
Mhm.
You see that? Okay, yeah.
Perfectly.
Excellent. We'll stop recording. Good. It's when you're trying these little tactics with this software. So I just use it for quickness before I do my own research. But ChatGPT, first time I've tried, Alois Erlmeyer, obviously predicts the Third World War, and major points that stood out for me. It's a sudden war. It begins in the Middle East, escalating rapidly. I don't
Mhm.
think that's Israel and Palestine. I think that's still going to be Iran, as Marie-Julie Jaheni says, with Persia. So there's still more to happen over there once they've done whatever it is they're trying to do there. But there again, echoing not just Marie Julie Jeheni, but also likes of Blessed Elena Elio, even Bruno
Mhm.
Trefantani, and others. Russia invades Western Europe like a lightning attack, as you said. The tanks rolling over toward the Rhine River. The war is very short. It will last only 3 days to 3 weeks. So it's going to be complete devastation for that moment of hoping to dominate things and turn it around for the better. Russia would be thinking. Usual 3 days of darkness stuff, which comes at the end of it all. Natural disasters. Now, what stands out here, obviously, because I live in England right now, massive earthquake and tidal wave in the North Sea and England. So I know for parts of England sink under the sea. If you get way back to even St. Columba, also known as St. Columkill, he predicted, and I think there's some associated with St. Patrick as well, of how Britain would sink beneath the waves and all this stuff. People were saying it could be erosion or it could be natural disasters. But Russia, on Russia state TV, like for at least a couple of years now, the first time I was aware of it, when they're talking about like this idea of war with Europe and the UK, Russia would nuke this in the North Sea with their Poseidon nuclear capabilities that would actually cause the earthquake and would cause the the tidal waves to come over the land. Now, this also echoes a mystic who's well known. If you ever remember the old VHS video, it's even on YouTube, the apparition of the 20th century, or apparitions of the 20th century, and it covers quite a few. One of them was a Ukrainian man called Joseph Terelia, and he even
Yes.
met John Paul II, and he went to Canada where he saw his last days. But according to a friend who I know has studied him and others very well, he said that he spoke about when the waters rose, and even included when the waters rose over England, how North Birmingham would become the south of England. Right now,
Mhm.
Birmingham is in the Midlands. It's known as the West Midlands. It's Middle England. Yet everything south of it, which includes all of London and other areas, all that's basically going to be underwater, according to him. Now, whether that's nuclear, whether the waters recede, or the fact that whatever devastation's done with the ozone, that well, sorry, the not the ozone, the crust of the Earth's core, then it might be permanent in terms of earthquakes and everything else that's going on, like that movie 2012. Now, I know this doesn't sound good, folks, for those that are listening to it, but again, it's many, many mystics, saintly people, prophecies that are all repeating one another, and yet they're all living in centuries ago or decades ago and they don't know of one another. But yet you're always getting fine tuning with different parts like this standing out. Now, this giant yellow dust that's to be released in the air, that sounds as if they're up to something as well, a chemical way of killing off a load of people. But it is a Russian attack suddenly without warning. The main route would be through Germany and Austria, according to this. But this is also when the Pope's to flee Rome. That's the first we're hearing about the church, about the Pope fleeing Rome. Again, because he also echoes the great monarch before the spiritual renewal. But yeah, look at the warning signs before all this happens, then, Xavier. A sudden economic collapse and great inflation. I've got a sense this is when I was saying at the beginning of the video, this is what I sense is coming shortly. I think this trend of big cyber attacks hitting airports, supermarkets, Jaguar Land Rover, and others. I think this is the warm up before it goes to like that movie Die Hard. Was it 4.0 or something? With Bruce Willis, and it was the infrastructure. It was it was the energy companies like the gas and electric. It was the banks. Some, I think, like Klaus Schwab says, they anticipated a pandemic of the internet, a great cyber attack within 2 years. That was 2 years ago. But I believe it's orchestrated. That's why it'll come true. He ain't a prophet. He just, they know there's a lot of these people, I believe, that are making this come around. And that's why the mass migration is orchestrated. That's why now the next step, as we've heard in the UK, will bring in digital IDs to stop this. That's a load of nonsense. It's never going to be for that reason. They've told us for years the many things that would come with digital ID. Why are they veiling it over with just saying it's to do with the migrants and working? It's not. There's a bigger thing of control coming over it. But again, large number of foreigners flooding into Europe, political unrest and breakdown of order. We're seeing stuff. But when the Pope leaving Rome, I think it could be anywhere between now and the end of December. If it's to be within 3 days to 3 weeks of a war, this might be a good place to bring up the Trefontani one that I've got from Michael over in Garabandal. I have to give him credit where it was him that alerted me to it. In Bruno's diary of Trefontani, he writes remember he dies in 2001, but he
Mhm.
writes in the year 2000, and I know people have heard me say this already, but it's good to put clear for us and repeat it. In the year 2000, he had one of his many prophetic dreams where it was like the Muslims killing people and that. He had quite a number of those ones even back then. And he writes in this how he and his community were at St. Peter's Square waiting for the Jubilee indulgences. So you're thinking,
Oh,
was it the year 2000 or is it 2025 or it wasn't 28? So all the Jubilees that have came, it hasn't happened yet. But this Jubilee year of 2025, if they're going to give us a surprise Jubilee again, it's probably going to be at 2033. But of the Jubilee cycles going back to the days of old, it's the 50-year cycles. That's the tradition. So 2025 to 2075 is an authentic Jubilee cycle. But in his diary, when he writes how they were at St. Peter's Square waiting for their Jubilee indulgences, they're queuing up to go through the holy doors at St. Peter's when this barbarian mob came and started killing them, death to the Christians and other things he writes. But he had them quite repeatedly throughout the years. Then what Michael says, use that as this Jubilee year for now, because not only are we at the end of the list of St. Malachi's popes, we've had the popes of Garabandal, two popes of Anne Catherine Emmerich. What began with Leo the 13th in 1884, we have this Leo in this Jubilee year. We're seeing Russia into Europe in the warpath, knowing that Father Malachi Martin said the final solution to Fatima would be between Russia and Kiev. Done.
mhm.
We're seeing mass Muslim immigration where they're now bringing in dystopian ideas as an excuse because of it. The list goes on. And of course, Marie Julie Johanny, let's not forget the big one. When the long reigning Queen of England would pass, the new sovereign on the throne would witness this disintegrating relationship between England, Israel, and Persia, as she called it. And we've seen all the back and forth with Iran coming and going. The world
Yeah.
seems to be divided, or more or less going towards the Palestinian side now against Israel. We saw most of the United Nations walking out when Netanyahu stood up to talk, but yet America still backs him up. Um, but where was that disintegrating relationship between England and Israel? Because we've been helping them against Iran the last couple of times. But just there's so much that's happened in the past week or two with all this stuff. Keir Starmer announced that the UK now recognises Palestine as a state. Then came France, Canada, Australia, and others all saying the same thing. Now, is that not a disintegrating relationship between England and Israel with the new pontiff after the Queen of England died, with all this other stuff happening as prophesied? So, could it be this Jubilee, which would be a very good Jubilee, that Bruno wrote about 25 years ago? They were for the Jubilee indulgences at St. Peter's when the mob started killing them all. Now, there's 200 days to the two full moons prophesied by St. John Bosco. I still don't know enough about it, but it's whatever mayhem and carry on's happening that I'm still thinking for the first time as we record this, after all you've told me about alloys here, if this is going to be a 3 day to a 3 week war, and all that's happening right now as we approach October 13th, I'm just going to put it out there. I'm not predicting it, and I'm not waiting for the date, but we know how big October 13th is. I still sense something's coming with things. Now, the prophecy of St. John Bosco, sorry to go on here, the 200 days to the month of flowers, which has two full moons, is to be a time of peace. This Jubilee year ends officially on January the 6th. May 2026, which is the month of flowers, has two full moons.
Mhm.
And it won't be another one till 2035, apparently. Now,
It's
see,
very difficult to keep a secret with you.
yeah,
You're a bit too smart.
but see,
You are
see,
very.
but see, May 1st and May 31st are when the two full moons will happen next year. May 1st will be the first. Do you know those 200 days prior to May 1st? Do you know what the 200 days are, where it begins? October
Tell
13th.
me.
October 13th. Honestly, sometimes it's a nail biting idea to think, why did Leo the 13th have his mystical experience of the devil getting his time and power on October 13th? Why was the Fatima miracle October 13th, which Russia was clearly all about in Fatima? And why again October 13th in the 70s was a key to Japan's prophecy given? I know every year people will wait for these dates, but look at this Jubilee year. Bruno speaks of it all kicking off in the Jubilee year. We're within the 3 days to 3 weeks idea with all that's building up right now. If this is going to be a short, quick, swift war, it could fit between now and October 13th. And then you've got the 200 days of the peace until the two full moons on May 1st.
I, th- I think that it's perfect. The pieces
It's
of puzzle the
perfect
way
that
you
it
did it.
fits, but I'm not expecting it to be that soon. That's the thing.
No, I think the following. I think that first of all, the war in Europe cannot possibly, even realistically, last 3 weeks, let alone 3 days. It's going to happen, from my understanding, of about 3 years and a half, all in all, from the beginning till the end, and it will finish with a new pope being placed on the seat of Saint Peter, an angelic pope in Rome. But it's going to take about 3 years and three and a half for these events to take place. And I think it will take place. I mean, as you mentioned Marie-Julie Jahini and her mentioning the passing away of an English queen. This is the beginning of the tribulations. Shortly after that, we had the October ordeal happen in Israel, Hamas, and from there on, escalation to the situation which we now know. The Gaza Strip looks more like the moon than what it used to look like 2 years ago.
Right.
So the war now seems. I don't know if you've heard of what the United Arab Emirates is trying to do right now. They're trying to form a new nation, which is a consortium of Muslim nations. It will be a caliphate with a new flag. The new flag is black with Arabic white writings and two branches of wheat on each side. It's a brand new creation. So, if we are to believe that, taking as a point of reference the passing away of Queen Elizabeth, the events, the tensions that are taking place between Israel, England, or let's say the Anglo Saxon nations, the United States, particularly England and the Allies, and Iran, already the first exchanges of fire have been taking place, and there will be more. Russia and Ukraine, this will be the beginning. We see that a conventional war there has taken place forever. I think that right now Europe is in no way shape to be able to face a conventional war against Russia. But for the time of the monarch to come from wherever he comes back to Europe, lead the way so many prophets or messengers have said, he would gather and reunite whatever is left military wise in Europe to throw away the Russians and throw the Muslims back to the sea in union with with a Spanish king, very likely King Philip VI, to come and join him. Uh, do a war of liberation of Italy. This is going to be extraordinarily difficult and long. And Father Michel talking about the refugees, people being called to be in the refugees for about 3 years and a half, which corresponds almost to perfection to what Marie-Julie Jani has announced. Plus, taking into consideration, brilliant analysis time-wise, this would mean that if we are to be faithful and keep up with your calendar, which I think is very realistic, and Luz de Maria, Father Michel, Marie-Julie Jahini, and others, no, no one can imagine Emmanuel Macron staying in power and no revolution taking place before the next elections, which will be in 2 years. No, I think the events will start very, very soon. And what's happening in England is also a clear signal that England will have, and the English people will have no more patience for the kind of mediocrity that Starmer has led your nation into. And they won't have any more patience. I don't believe. It's not easy to gather 3 million people to say, stop, we are against this rubbish. I don't think England will be patient anymore. I think they had their fill. So did the French people, and I think the war is knocking at the door. It's a question of months, I believe.
Yeah, that's what I
I
said.
could be wrong.
Knocking at the door. We might have saw it approaching from afar a few years ago. We might have said
Mhm.
a year ago it was at the garden gate, but now it's knocking at our door. And with all that you've just said there, Xavier, just to be clear for myself, if not for others, um, I know we don't predict, but are you thinking we're okay still as things are for another 3 years, 5 years, or do you think it could as be soon as between now and December, between now and next year, to really see a lot of this monstrous global impact of war and natural disaster? Do you think we're close to it as in months rather than a few years?
I'll tell you what I sincerely believe. I think the warning will take place sooner than we any of us suspect. I think that there will be revolts in Europe starting next year. 2026 um, is going to be a disaster. In England, I don't think the English people will stand for it much longer. Same can be said for France. In Spain, we have a major issue in Spain. No one talks about it. But in Spain, we have Muslims that have taken over complete cities, towns, or parcels of the Spanish capital. Italy, they're doing somewhat better, although their situation is not very brilliant. And the Germans are up to here. The Russians will not also take much more. Ukraine will fall. And the Middle East, you don't need to be a visionary to know that the situation is going to go and grow much worse. This is going to be an unavoidable conflict between an Arab or Muslim coalition against Israel and Israelites. It's a question of time. You don't have to be a visionary to know that. I think 2026 will be a pivotal. Next year, uh, in 1 year from this moment, we will be talking if we will be talking, because I don't think that the internet will be available very much longer either. And I know it sounds very exaggerate and very pessimistic, but in retrospective, stepping backwards, observing the situation, nobody would have, if somebody would have told you, Mark, 5 years ago, that we would be in this situation 5 years later today, they would have laughed at your face. They would have said, "What? A war between Russia and Ukraine? Russia would have never sent its troops in Ukraine, and they would never threaten each other with nuclear war. Right now, Iran is holding its breath. It's in the midst of negotiation with its nuclear program with the United Nations. All this is rubbish. You're a complotist." This is what they would have told you 5 years ago. Now, what we're living now is science fiction for what we were 5 years ago. So I do believe it's objective, it's realistic, and in view of what has been predicted by visionaries and messengers that were never wrong in the past, it's it would be almost irresponsible to ignore what has been foretold and what is happening in the present time. I hope that's as best an answer I can give you. I hope that was acceptable.
Yeah, yeah, just to clear up like the sooner rather than later, because again, other things we have to remember. I know you explained about the news with the Estonian airspace with Russian drones and that, but then I heard news that it's happened in Romania, it's happened in Poland.
With drones, yes.
Poland made a very clear warning at the United Nations meeting where it says if we legally shoot down any Russian drones or aircraft that come into our sovereign airspace and it lands, the wreckage lands in Polish soil, don't come here whining about it. You've been warned. That was hard words from Poland. So that's happened in those countries just in the past 10 to 12 days. Then
That's true.
Denmark as well. But then now there's Russian submarines being detected off Greenland, and you know why
Mhm.
Trump's trying to get the Americans into Greenland and all this for security. It's just constant now. So although everything's focused on Ukraine, it just shows you the expansion that Russia can actually go and do all this everywhere else. And look at the Chinese military parade where you had China, Russia, and North Korean leaders all together, which we highlighted earlier. These are the countries, and they're already together. A devastation would come from the east, you know. So
I totally
and
agree. But look, we could have avoided all this. We could have avoided all this. Um, Again, it seems that there is a French expression that says "être en retard d'une guerre," which means in English to be late of a war. We think that if there is another world war, it's going to be conventional like in the times of 1940s. Big arrows, big disembarkment. The consequences, we must, as Europeans, because this is principally a European show, although we have some Americans as well. But the consequences of a war with Russia, let us not fool ourselves or hide ourselves behind our little finger. That will be seeing, observing from afar London under radioactive ashes, Paris, Berlin, and other capitals under radioactive ashes. And then what? Our politicians will say, oh, yes, it's true, we lost millions, but we did the right thing. That will be their consolations. That is what will be said to fathers and mothers who've lost family members in the capital, the patrimony that our ancestors left us all. That will be the sentence of consolation that we will hear instead of trying to negotiate diplomatically with a Russia who, as well, and I don't try to make myself the devil's advocate, I'm not pro Putin, but the Russians from day one were concerned of seeing NATO at the doorstep of their territory. They did not want, they did exactly what the Americans did against the Russians when the Russians were about to put their missiles in Cuba. Let's not forget that. John Fitzgerald Kennedy almost started World War III because the Russians were installing not only troops in Cuba, but thermonuclear missiles ready to hit the United States in matters of minutes. The Russians wanted the same securities as John Fitzgerald Kennedy wanted in the 1960s. They did not want nuclear bases less than half an hour away from Moscow. Who could possibly blame them?
Exactly.
If if they would have found some sort of diplomatic resolve, the situation could have been avoided a long time ago through diplomacy. But I do not know what happened with the leaders of the West. Instead of trying to resolve what I think General Charles de Gaulle would have done, because not only did he have the culture of a European person, he knew the history of Russia. Russia was made originally from Ukraine. This is a civil war between two brotherly Slavic nations. Same culture, same history. Odessa was built by Catherine the Great, for Pete's sakes. Same with Kiev. So because of this, like in 1939, because of Poland, now the situation is somewhat different. Russians and Vladimir Putin is being right now criticized by other politicians in the Kremlin for not being strong enough. I assure you that if somebody else would have been in his position, like Medvedev, there would have been already tactical nuclear weapons against the Ukrainian capital. The matter would have been resolved much sooner, and who knows, maybe a third world war. But I can safely say I've never lived under the mandate of General Charles de Gaulle. But I grew up with all his stories. I read all his memoirs. I am absolutely certain that if General de Gaulle would have lived in these times, he would have sent a delegation to Moscow along with the English. We would have resolved a common agreement and we would have sat around and we would have settled the matter diplomatically, not to reach at the point where we are about to touch the red buttons. And remember what Father Michel stated, no? And Luz de Maria confirmed this as well, that it will be at the point when people will start considering pushing the red button and starting exchanging nuclear fire, that this will be a catalyst that will force God, not force him, but will incite God to manifest himself with the warning. I think we're not very far from that.
Mm.
So,
So with
à la
everything,
grâce de Dieu.
yeah, and with all that being said as well, and all again, the list continues of what's happened. The other one I just had there, it's like Trump's done a 180 against Putin. It's as if, you know what, I thought we would get this deal done quick. It's not happening. All that White House shouting with Zelensky. Now they're friends, and Ukraine can get their whole land back. You just done a 180. What's that saying to Putin? Right, we've had our time. Socks pulled up. That's why there's subs in Greenland. That's why all these drones and jets hitting all different European countries while they think or they're telling us that Russia cannot win in Ukraine. Well, there's a stretch for all over everywhere else says something different. Plus with China, North Korea and any other nation back there backing them up. I know we're running out of time with stuff, Xavier. The warning's coming soon. The only thing I want to say about the warning idea is I remember reading like Conchita was quoted as saying, when everything's at its worst, the warning would come. But she said it would be difficult to travel to Garabandal when the miracle's due. Even with the 8 days' notice, it will be difficult. Everything said would make that difficult. But let's even just say, right, you don't need the war. You don't need tsunamis and earthquakes. You just need your digital ID preventing you. So it's true. It's true.
Yes,
We're
it's true.
already seeing cyber attacks on airports after many other laws are coming into play, from climate change, carbon footprint tracking, to taxes, making it all the more less appealing or difficult to travel here from the UK. The amount of stuff happening at once, and that's why I can see that intensity building. But how? I mean, we know how to spiritually prepare, and maybe that's another focus video we can do later with
Oh, yes.
remedies and refuges and all this stuff, and spiritual preparedness, of course, first and foremost. But we need to be practical with a little finance in a digital world. How far are we going to go until we say no? This to me is the mark of the beast. This to me is something I cannot abide with in tyranny. We might be okay to work with a digital ID, but when it comes to the other things that we know will come with it, maybe drip feeding, when at that point we need to cut off, therefore we're out of job, we're out the public square, how are we going to buy and sell? We need to be practical with food and water. Do we diversify with gold and silver, some cash? Or even then, if we can't trade in our silver or gold or cash anymore in a digital world that have shut us off, then surely the only thing left for survival and our wealth is our food and water. But how do you say to people practically, or what you've read and researched or been told with Luz or Father Michelle, in terms of prepping, like materialistically for survival, what have we to do there, if anything?
Well, the recommendation, along with that of another famous and celebrated priest in visionary in Brazil, Father Oliveira, are identical. Now, keep in mind that Father Oliveira only speaks Portuguese, Luz de Maria only Spanish, Father Michel only French and English. They do not know each other, never spoke to one another. They cannot, anyway. And they're all saying the same thing: prepare with supplies that would be lasting a minimum of 3 months, and they promise that if everyone lives through a particular some process of conversion that involves living one life in accordance with the teachings of Holy Scriptures, particularly the Ten Commandments, the four Gospels. If one goes frequently to the Holy Sacrament of the Catholic Church, particularly Holy Confession, preferably once a month, especially first Saturdays of every month. If one receives Holy Communion as often as possible, but at least every Sunday, in a state of grace, and in full conscience that we are receiving literally the body and blood, soul, and divinity of our Lord Jesus Christ. And if we are consecrated, if we consecrate ourselves to the Sacred Heart of Christ, to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, those supplies, even if the events and the turmoil last over 3 months, there will be miracles in the homes with multiplication of supplies that will go well beyond 3 months. So that is what these three extraordinary messengers of heaven are telling us, and are inviting us to do, and to pray the Holy Rosary on a daily basis, and to fast at least once a week. So that is the best answer again I can give you. There is much more. Perhaps we could do another show to deepen the subject. And let's see if we can get perhaps even Father Michel, if you like, to come over to your show and have him answer directly to your questions. Would you like that, laddie?
Yeah, well, you keep saying I'm your best friend, so I think you should try and make that happen.
You are one of my best friends, unquestionably. And I'll keep saying it absolutely, because it's true.
Well, remember that one we did when he did the world one? My microphone mixing in with all the software at the time. I couldn't actually speak to him when it was my turn, so I actually haven't spoken to him yet when others did. So it would be good to
I
get
know.
that rectified.
That would be a nice thing to do. I'm going to work on that and I will let you know ASAP.
Perfect. Well, thanks very much as always, Xavier. There's been something good to speak there. I think when the few weeks between our talks, when they come, it feels a refreshment to have the knowledge, still being aware of it. But we have to remember with everyone watching, prophecy is not to scare us, it's to prepare us. Spiritual preparation, material preparation for survival, it's all for preparation. But if we are choosing to be children of God as we are, and we're choosing heaven over hell, we're choosing Jesus rather than Satan or the Antichrist, when we're choosing the church of Christ and not the false church of the Antichrist. And for all that the sin of the world seems to be winning, remember grace abounds all the more. And that's why we need to keep our chins up. We have to keep hoping in the Lord. And for me, it's not scary at all. It's confirmation because it's happening. What we're reading, it's happening right now. It's confirmation. And that just gives me more passion and zeal to say yes for the Lord, to empty myself, the prospects of life, although I live life to the full and a life of grace. It's a case of like, you know what, this is all about what God's ready to do, and here I am, here I am. So yeah, as always, mon ami, thanks for your time and patience. And if you want to just finish with final word or prayer, it's all yours.
Yes, I ask all your viewers sincerely to keep faithfully your attention on Mark's channel. Mark has a very particular and appointed mission to bring the truth to your attention. And once these events are coming through, once Father Michel, once Conchita Gonzalez, and others give the final message from heaven for people to prepare, you will hear it through Mark's channel, among others. So let us pray for Mark, for his mission, for his family, and thank you all for your kindness and for your time. Mark, thank you, laddie.
Thank you, merci beaucoup. And for everyone watching, again, like we say, prophecy is to prepare you, not to scare you. So pray, hope, and don't worry, as St. Pio said. And until next time, as always, take care and God bless.